Hi there. We're celebrating the 70th anniversary of a truly remarkable little book, Harold and the Purple Crayon by Crockett Johnson. We're also marking the book's new Spanish and Catalan editions, Harold y el lápiz morado and Harold y el llapis morat, published by Wanda Ponder, a literature and philosophy for children publisher based in Madrid, Spain. In fact, it's the first time ever that Harold is going to be available in Catalan, so that's very exciting. I'm Ellen Duthie, a partner at Wanda Ponder, a children's literature author myself, a philosophy for children facilitator, and also, importantly for this conversation, a Crockett Johnson and Ruth Krauss enthusiast, and the translator of this new edition of Harold into Spanish. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Philip Nel, who is even more of an enthusiast, I think, Crockett Johnson and Ruth Krauss. If you don't know his double biography, How an Unlikely Couple Found Love, Dodged the FBI and Transformed Children's Literature, please go and get your hands on it and read it. Phil is University Distinguished Professor of English at Kansas State University and the author or co-editor of 15, 16 books maybe now?
15.
Yeah. 15 still, including the double biography I just mentioned, Keywords for Children's Literature, Was the Cat in the Hat Black?, The Hidden Racism of Children's Literature and the Need for Diverse Books, and How to Draw the World, which is the book we would be chatting about today. There we go, we did it at the same time. This is another truly remarkable little book, I would say, like the origin, the original book. It contains an in-depth, entertaining, and genuinely insightful and I think also inspiring study of Harold and the Purple Crayon from as many different points of view as you could possibly imagine. It's part of the Oxford University Press series Children's Classics Critically, and I think the book helps us see just how much is happening beneath Harold's spare purple line. We'll be talking about Crockett Johnson's great little masterpiece, what it still has to teach us 70 years later about literature, imagination, and generally I think the joy of making things up. We'll mention surprise, translation, humor, color, mathematics, maybe even AI, and what happens when adults read children's books seriously. I hope we have time to cover all that anyway. We'll see where we get to. Thank you, Phil, for being here to celebrate Harold's birthday with us. In fact, you pointed out when we arranged this talk that it has also been Crockett Johnson's birthday earlier this week. He would have been 119. So happy birthday to Harold, happy birthday to Crockett, and welcome, Phil. It's a treat to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's a delight to talk about Harold and the Purple Crayon.
It always is. As I was saying in the intro, Harold and the Purple Crayon has just turned 70, and yet it feels very much alive and kicking, and it's still modern, revolutionary even. Mm-hmm. And when you read it with children, they also take it as revolutionary, which is something I really like about a 70-year-old book that still has children gasping and wondering. What do you think it is about this little book that has made it last so very well? I know there are lots of things, but...
Well, it's a dramatization of human creativity. We seem to be watching Harold draw the story that we are reading while we are reading it. And so I think that really brings you into the perspective of the artist and what it is like to be an artist, because we are watching the artist tell the story that the artist is in. And, I think it's inspiring because it reminds us that to create a world, you need a blank page and a crayon. You need your imagination. And that's what creativity is, right? It's the friction of the mind against the blank page. And Harold shows us how to do it.
No more and no less. Yeah. Harold's line is so simple, a single purple line, and yet it seems to contain everything, like a horizon, a boundary, a path, a question, every single possibility that might come on the next. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a big question maybe, but what do you think Crockett Johnson was exploring through that simplicity? Because he was not only in Harold, in other books as well, he's very drawn to absolutely paring things down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say a few things. I think for Johnson, drawing is a form of thinking. Paul Klee once said that drawing is taking a line for a walk, which is literally what Harold does. And Johnson was a visual thinker. He spent the last decade of his life painting mathematical theorems,
Mm,
and he solved two and published those. But he solved them not algebraically. He solved them by painting them. He figured it out. He figured out the math visually, and then he corresponded with mathematicians to get that into algebra because he had a high school education. You know, he was not a mathematician. So I think that's part of it. And then you also asked about simplicity. Um, Johnson's a cartoonist, and cartoons are of their nature iconographic. They speak in symbols. They try to distill ideas, human experience into a succinct visual language that is immediately legible when we open up the comic. You know, it's sort of and Chris Ware has a wonderful way of putting this, and I'm gonna misquote him, but it's, you know, language. I think he said something like it's language that is not so much to be read but seen. And I think what he's trying to convey is that a well-written comic seems to transmit its ideas directly into your brain. It does not do that, of course, but the precision and simplicity with which it speaks reaches you efficiently. And I think that's also really key to Johnson's minimalist aesthetic and how that works on us. He only gives us in the book what we need. He
mm,
doesn't give us anything extra. Harold doesn't draw anything extra. If
yeah,
it's necessary for the story, it's in there. If it's not, it's not. And this wasn't part of your question, but one of the things I love about it also is that the crayon is the engine of narrative.
mm,
What Harold draws is what moves the plot forward. It's not something where you have like, all right, here's words, and now we're going to come up with pictures, and there's going to be an interaction between them. There is that, but the crayon actually produces where we're going. So
mm.
you can't, it's not, this could not really be a collaboration except between Crockett Johnson and himself.
And Crockett Johnson, exactly. Um, and it's sort of related to the sort of fascinating combination of improvisation and planning in the
Yeah.
book, no? I mean, Harold doesn't plan ahead. He draws and reacts and sort of figures
Mhm.
out what he does next. I find there's sort of sort of tension between the improvisation and the precision. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
Really
Johnson.
fascinating, and I also love the fact that children do too. They
Mhm.
they they sort of really try to work it out when you read. They go, "Hang on a moment, what's going on? You know, what is this magic? You know, what's
Yeah.
happening?"
Yeah. What's another brilliant thing about the book is that Harold improvises, but Johnson has not.
No.
Johnson has figured out an entire giant drawing in advance, and then we watch Harold create that drawing. So Johnson knows where we're going. Harold seems not to, but the entire improvised story is, in fact, a carefully planned story. And what's great about it is you don't notice that while you're reading it, right? Because
Mm.
you're not supposed to notice it while you're reading it. So it's wonderful that children, you know, try to figure it out. Wait, how did he? What you know?
Exactly. Well, I mean, I read a lot of picture books in sort of philosophical discussion context with kids of all ages. So, I mean, one of the things that I love about certain maybe the 5, 6, 7, 7-year-olds, they especially five, maybe 5, 6-year-olds, they actually for one moment believe that something different might happen on the on the third reading.
Hmm.
They're like, will he, will he solve it in the same way, or could he do it some other
Hmm.
way? They actually believe in the building, in the gradual building
Hmm.
of the story, which I find sort of fascinating that it can have that effect on the reader. And one of the things I love about Harold as well, and this is related maybe to what we're talking about, is how full of surprise it is, not just for the reader, but for Harold, which is also a sort of humor I just love that kind of. And when reading it with children, I also like the fact that say the reader shares the surprise the first time, but then on rereading, the surprise changes a bit. No, the children can delight in a surprise they already know is coming, which I always think
Hmm.
is something. It's about knowing and still feeling the joy of discovery, which I think this is one of these books that does that so wonderfully well. No? So this sort of magical paradox of literature, especially for maybe children's literature, that repetition doesn't erase surprise. It's just the surprise that
Well,
keeps on
yeah,
giving.
and I think we come to identify with Harold and see what he's seeing as he's seeing it. So even if we know where it's going, we're watching him think this through, and
Mm.
we're invited to align ourselves with his thinking. And so when he gets surprised, we get surprised, even if we know the surprise, because we have been interpolated into this narrative with him, and we're watching him figure it out again. So
Mm.
yeah.
And I suppose it's related as well, but we don't always talk about how funny Harold is. No, it's kind of
Hmm.
quietly comic, like related to this surprise, I suppose. No, the dragon, the nine pies, the moon, also the moon that follows him. um,
Right.
sort of, it feels like well, the humor feels essential to the intelligence of the book as well. It's not sort of
Yeah,
punchline humor, but the humor
and
of
what I
curiosity and discovery in some way.
there's a gentle humor because the nine pies are genuinely funny.
Mhm.
Harold drew up a nice simple picnic lunch. There was nothing but pie. They were all nine kinds of pie that Harold liked best. Like that's funny, but it's also not. It's also quite sincere. Harold is having a picnic lunch of his favorite pie, and why shouldn't he? If you could draw a picnic lunch of your favorite pie, I mean, what a treat. So Johnson is not having a laugh at Harold's expense. He's amused by that train of thought, but he's not saying, "Look at this silly kid." No, no,
No.
he's saying, "Have some pie." You know?
Absolutely, yes, yes, and choose. And Harold is the story of a boy and a crayon, but it's certainly not complete with the moon. A boy, a crayon, and the moon. Um,
Mhm.
what is it with the moon in Harold and the Purple Crayon?
Well, the moon is the only part of Harold's drawing that moves. All the rest of it is stationary. And the moon provides the illusion that this is real, that we are, in fact, in three dimensions. It is that um, bit of scenery that you put on the stage that tells you, okay, this is night, even though it's a white page.
Yeah, I mean
Even,
that's incredible. I hadn't thought of that until I read it in your book. I just thought, oh,
yeah.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah, we accept that it's night because there's a moon, but that's what a set does. Even a very minimal set, you just provide the necessary prop that tells you where you are, and the moon tells us where we are. And it's also Harold's, inspiration. It's his muse. It's how he solves a problem. One of the things I like about the book is that whenever Harold encounters a problem, whether it's his own making or maybe not, he always has a solution. When your scribble becomes an ocean, you draw a boat. When it's too dark for a walk, you draw the moon. So I think the moon is also that little light bulb of an idea
Mm,
that Harold is always able to generate. It is the light that guides him forward in the book, but it's also a version of the light of his imagination,
mm,
which he relies upon throughout the book, and which we all rely upon. To live is to improvise. Artists are our most gifted improvisers, and that's what Harold shows us. You have to be able to improvise. You will face challenges. You will face problems of your own making and problems not, and you're just gonna have to make it up as you go along and have faith and don't drop the crayon.
yeah.
Hang on to your crayon, whatever that means for you, right? It's not a
Exactly.
literal crayon, but whatever the crayon is for you, your imaginative life, the way that you approach the world. Don't let go of it.
Yeah.
Keep faith. Hang on to it.
Well, while we're on the subject of color, we talked about the white knight, the white background, the
Mhm.
brown outline, the purple line. The white. is interesting because it's night, but also just how the blankness of the page functions in the story. There's something very sort of specific to it.
Yes, the blankness is an invitation to create. The blankness is an invitation to draw. And one of my favorite things about Harold is that if you look for used copies of these books, as I have, you will find that children accepted the invitation. Uh,
Absolutely.
and one of my favorite things was finding a some of those pages that a librarian sent to Johnson. I think partly in jest.
Mhm.
He wrote a very long and satirical response, which he ended up not sending to her. About how his books were designed to combat the scourge of crayon vandalism. That they would attract the crayon vandals and spare the other books. Uh, Um, but yeah, I think the blankness of the page is an invitation for Harold, just as it is an invitation for a creative person. You have a piece of paper, and you face that piece of paper, and you write, or you draw, you express what is on your mind, and then in so doing, understand it and yourself a bit better.
Mm. And I've seen a German edition where Harold's crayon
Yeah.
is red.
Yeah, I have it. I
Oh,
can
you
go
have
get it
it?
off
Oh,
the
wow.
shelf if you want.
I've only seen pictures, but
I'll go get it.
cool.
I have a whole I have a whole shelf of Harold translations, and your Catalan one will be, I believe, the 15th different language. There are 14 languages, but the first German translation is "I Make My Own World," would be the literal translation, and that is Orange, which I really love as a title
Do
because he
you?
does his own world.
I know he
Oh,
does, but I think it kind of is a bit of it's a bit of a sort of an explanation, if you know what I mean.
yeah, it is. Oh, I mean. Here's the current German translation. It's Harold
Uh,
and the Magic
Right,
Chalk.
which also over explains,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's kind
Um,
of
Although they've
funny
given
that.
him the blue jumper that he has since 1998 on the Herald editions.
Mm,
But this is a different translation, and it does give that sticks to the color, but
six of the
but
purple.
the Ich mach mir meine eine Welt does not. That is indeed orange. So yeah. But
And
it does. I mean, there are other. The French one is pink, or one of the French translations is pink. So
oh yeah,
the color shifts. It's not entirely consistent.
and do you think it changes the story in any way? Is purple mm, special?
Um, I think purple is um more herald color than orange. There's something about purple that is grounded in a way that orange is not. It's
Mm,
also, at least in English, it's a fun word to say, the word purple. Um, Does it change the story? The story is the same, but I don't know. There's something playful about purple that I don't quite experience in the same way with orange. So
right.
I think it does change the feel of it a bit to
Mm,
me, the story. I think it does.
mm. And what about the brown contour line?
Yeah, he has only two colors
Mm,
here, which on the one hand could be simply his keen understanding of how printing worked at the
mm,
time. You add the color in two layers. He has one layer where it's the path of Harold's crayon, and that's done in purple ink. And then another layer where he adds everything that is brown, and that is Harold's outline, and that is the typeface. And then for Harold's complexion, for his hands and his face, there's a screen that filters out all but 10% of the brown. And so
mm,
that's how you get the light tan color. So that's literally how the book was made. Brown is also Crockett Johnson's favorite color, not
mm,
purple. So it could be a nod to his favorite color. He dressed in brown. He drove a brown car. Um, and yeah, I mean, it ties back to his the minimalist aesthetic of the book. His own aesthetic was minimalist.
right.
If you're going to wear brown, brown goes with brown.
Hmm.
You don't have to think about what you're going to wear every day. You just pull brown from the
Just
closet, put it
blends
on,
in, yeah.
go on with your day. So
Hmm.
so there's a sartorial minimalism that perhaps
Hmm.
is an echo of Harold's and Johnson's minimalist artistic style.
Right. Um, and we mentioned just before we started the recording that in the 90s it was when they changed the cover and gave Harold blue
They
pajamas
did, yeah.
and
They made the book a little larger, and
mm,
they gave him a blue jumper.
and
So
a decidedly more pinkish or orangey, dare I say
yeah,
it,
on the
face.
cover he has a
Mm,
sort of more peach or Caucasian complexion face
mhm.
than he does on Johnson's original. Yeah.
And in our Spanish and Catalan editions, we have chosen to keep the white pajamas an original face color. Hey.
I'm so delighted, and I've actually been talking with Harper about 75th anniversary editions for this,
Right.
and they have expressed interest in restoring the correct
Yeah.
colors
I think
cover.
also, I mean, our main reason originally was aesthetic. It was just like it looks, where did the blue come from? You know,
It does look better. It doesn't make
it
any sense.
does.
Is the blue on the front and white in the
Exactly. It
middle?
doesn't
Blue
make
doesn't
sense.
contrast well with brown on the
Mm.
cover, so it doesn't actually stand out in the same way. It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
No. So, but also actually, I think we were influenced by your question as to whether Harold might be read as a black kid
Hmm.
and your rather persuasive arguments in this regard. Could you talk about that reading and why
Sure.
it matters?
It's inspired by the fact that children did read Harold as a child of color. Both children of color and white kids read him as a child of color. And so one of the reasons for making the argument is to authorize that reading, is to say, if that's the way you see Harold, you're not wrong to
Mm.
see Harold that way. There were very few books in 1955 where a child of color could see him or herself reflected. And if that's what Harold is for you, then Harold should stay that way for you no matter what's on the cover.
Mm.
And it is an unusual choice to use 10% brown as Caucasian in
Yeah.
the language of the day and in the visual language of the day as well. It would be more common to use 10% of that purple, which would give you a pinkish hue. So it's possible that that was also on Johnson's mind. He was pro-civil rights since the 1940s. He drew anti-racist cartoons
Mm.
in the 30s and the 40s. So it's also possible that this had occurred to Johnson himself, based on the fact that that's an unusual color choice for quote unquote Caucasian, and based on his own politics. Did he make that choice? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Um, but it's a possibility, and I want a book that, especially now adults of color, but also children of color, I want a book that the children have seen themselves in
Mm.
to continue to be that book for those children. And so that is my strongest argument against the 1998, 1999
Yeah.
revisions to the covers. So that's really what's behind it. I don't know if that's what Johnson intended, but it also doesn't really matter
No.
because that's the aesthetic that he chose, and that makes Harold racially ambiguous.
Mm.
You could read him as I did as a kid. I saw him as white kid as I was, but the African American picture book creator Brian Collier saw him as a black kid and identified with him. Chris Ware, the cartoonist, also saw him as a black kid and identified with him. He's a
Right.
white cartoonist.
Mm.
So I wanted to leave that open. I wanted to leave his racial
The
ambiguity
ambiguity. Yeah.
front and
Mm.
center.
You've written a lot about Crockett Johnson and Ruth Krauss.
Yeah.
How do you see Harold fitting into their shared creative universe?
Well, in a way, the book that is closest to Harold and the Purple Crayon that Ruth worked on is A Very Special House, which is a
Mhm.
collaboration with Maury Sendak, which is also a child drawing a world, drawing a very special house, drawn by Maury Sendak, of course. It was, I think, his first Caldecott honor, so it was a really big book for them, and that is inspired by one of the stories that Ruth heard. Children would tell stories, and following the tradition of the Backstreet School, she would listen to those stories, and then she would turn those stories into picture books. A Hole is a
Mm.
Dig, the most famous example of that. But A Very Special House also comes from children's stories. Children were playing with cardboard boxes and making houses out of them, and she observed that. As I recall, also a nursery school teacher named Norma Simon observed that, and that's where that came from. Johnson's stories came from here. They came from his head. They did not come from observation, but that is an earlier version of the notion of drawing your own world in Ruth's work.
Right.
And he was also present when Ruth was working on her books with Maurice, and would often serve as mediator, designer. I was looking recently at A Hole is a Dig, and you can see notes and some drawings in Crockett
Mhm.
Johnson's hands where he's figuring out, well, what if you drew the character this way? So he's an unacknowledged collaborator
Right.
in their work as well, which is interesting. I mean, it's his idea that A Hole is a Dig being that small size, which
Oh,
is,
yeah.
the same size that Harold is. That was his suggestion. So
Mhm.
um, I think I have strayed from your question. You were asking me to draw connections between
Well, but
Crockett
yes,
Crockett
you
Johnson.
have it straight. It's fine. You stayed in
Oh.
the universe.
I
Um,
feel like I steered away a little bit here. So.
it's fine. Steer all you like. In Spain, probably people don't know much about Crockett Johnson. Maybe there's a sort of sector of comic book lovers who know the Barnaby comics, but in general, he's not a very well-known figure. But he was a sort of incredibly varied personality, or he was a cartoonist, a political thinker, mathematician, like you said. Um, how do some of these other sides creep into Harold, would you say?
Well, the boundary between the imaginary and the real is a theme of Barnaby, which
Mm,
is Crockett Johnson's comic strip that ran from 1942 to 1952. It's often compared to Calvin and Hobbes because as Calvin has this imaginary tiger who is very real to him, so Barnaby has this imaginary fairy godfather. Bill Watterson didn't read Crockett Johnson, so there's no direct influence there. And O'Malley, which is Barnaby's fairy
mm,
godfather, is in fact real. The children all know that he's real, and the occasional adult sees him, and we readers know that he's real. But the strips are all playing with the notion of the boundary between fantasy and reality, and how permeable that boundary can be, and why we should not do as many of the adults do in the Barnaby strip and try to explain that away. If we maybe look a little more closely, we'll learn something. There's also a wonderful sequence where Barnaby and Mr. O'Malley visit an art gallery at night, and the art comes alive, and they interact with it, which seems like an earlier exploration of Harold and the Purple Crayon, in which art is life. Art does
right.
come alive.
Mhm.
So that would be a connection between some of Johnson's other work and Barnaby. Yeah, I mean, Harold draws the balloon with the precision of a mathematician using a protractor to draw a circle. That's not the style of a child drawing a balloon.
Mm,
That's the style of a mathematician drawing a balloon. And we accept it
mm,
because it comes from Harold's crayon, is Harold's drawing. But that kind of precision, I think, is something you see throughout Johnson's work, whether it's drawing for children, doing mathematical equations, or um, doing cartooning. He had a very iconographic style. And in fact, of math, one of the characters uses equations in Barnaby. Atlas is the mental giant, and he actually speaks in solvable math equations sometimes where he's trying
mhm.
to remember something and then he gives you an equation. And if you reduce the equation and solve it, you actually get words. But that's something of a tangent
Right.
from
You talk about rediscovering Harold at age 14,
Yeah.
wandering into the children's section and finding yourself sort of drawn back to those books. Mm, can you tell us a bit about that moment and what Harold meant to you then?
Yeah, I think it was reconnecting with the delight as a child in discovering that I knew how to read, in the delight as a child I took in reading, and that immersion that I felt in a book as a kid.
Mm,
I think it reconnected me with the joy of discovery that I had as a child, and that many years of public schooling had kind of beaten out of me.
yes.
So I think it connected me with that spark of delight. And then, I picked it up when I was a new student at a school, or a school that was new to me. And I think the notion of solving your problems via creativity probably appealed to me on some level then too. Um, I think it also just speaks to maybe why it took me a little while to become a better student is that I tend to pursue things that interest me and not do what I'm supposed to do. Because I was encountering these books when there was a faculty meeting, and my mother, who was teaching at the school, had to be at the faculty meeting, and my sister and I were in the library. We were supposed to be doing our work, and since this was a school that was K through 9, there was a children's section, and so instead of doing our own homework, I went and played with the children's books. My sister did her homework, and I was reading Harold and the Purple Crayon. So I think it also speaks to my own perhaps lack of discipline at that
Perhaps.
age.
And do you think that rediscovery at that age influenced how you have later approached children's books as a scholar?
Yes, I think I could not have put words to it then,
Mm,
but children's books have something to teach all of us humans, no matter what age we are. And they should not be dismissed as only for a certain age group. If you approach them with an open mind and an open heart, there is something in a good children's book for everyone. So I think without really having the language for that yet, they told me that it was okay for someone no longer the target audience to read children's books and to take those children's books seriously.
mm. I'm sort of fascinated always to read to see how children and adults interpret things differently, you know? And how children can just take things on board without particularly being worried about it. And I was surprised to discover that Johnson's editor, the great Ursula Nordstrom, wasn't quite sure about Harold when she first received it. And I have to say, I giggled out loud when I heard her initial comments that she writes, I found myself asking such dumb questions like, where did he draw the moon and the path and the tree? You know? And then she adds, you can see from this heavy-handed comment that I didn't read the story with much imagination. It's, um, it's kind of those questions are the whole point. No, about what makes it so fabulous, mind-bogglingly philosophical, and I'm so grateful to her for thinking twice. No? Um, but what does this and that anecdote tell us about Harold, about editing, about the reader's imaginative role? There's something I find interesting about that kind of initial. Oh no, something doesn't work here.
It's interesting to read not just Ursula's letter, but the readers' reports, the Harper readers reading the manuscript and what they thought of it. Because you see them, like Ursula, confused at first, but then the more they write about it, by the end of their comment, they're in favor of it. You know? So they initially are a little confused by it, and they start to think about it, and then they like it.
Mm,
So I think for someone who's unfamiliar with this conceit, perhaps it just takes a moment where you engage with the book on its own terms and suspend your disbelief,
mm,
just as Harold is able to suspend his and create his own world, as the German translation would tell us.
indeed.
Um, so I think it has something to do with that, and I think when anything is new, it doesn't make sense, and then once it's not new, well, we always knew that that
Yeah.
was that was a great idea. So I
Mm-hmm.
I think there's that moment before people recognize something as a great idea, where it's just, what are you? doing is the
Doing. What is this? Yeah.
then subsequently people say, well, this was a great idea,
Mm.
as if we all always knew it was a great idea. But
Exactly.
that's not necessarily how creative genius is initially received, and that's okay, you know.
So I wanted to ask you about your book title, How to Draw the World. It's a beautiful title, but it's interesting when considering the translations. For example, in
Mm,
Spanish and Catalan, we've taken care not to use the verb draw,
mm.
dibujar, or trazar anywhere in the text. Johnson only uses draw once in the English original at the very end when Harold drew up his covers.
Yeah, and he's using
Um,
that for a pun there too, right? So it's
Obviously,
directly.
so in English it has that lovely double meaning with drawing as in sketching, but also as in pulling the blanket over himself. You can't reproduce that in Spanish or Catalan. So we wanted to preserve that sense that Harold isn't, I suppose, representing something that's already there, but he's creating it as it goes. He's making the world, like the Germans, like the Germans let us know. So I thought, well, it's sort of interesting because I was in the middle of editing the Catalan translation, and they had done originally the translator had chosen dibujar, which is to draw or trazar. And I was like, oh no, we can't have that. And then I looked at your title and I went, oh, but Phil's used it, you know. And so it was, but I just thought it was interesting to think about, well, the difference between drawing and making in
Yeah,
Harold.
can I ask you too about the translation, or if there's a particular word or phrase that kind of illustrates the challenge of translating?
Well,
Maybe,
what we've
maybe
done
draw is the one.
most of the time, Crockett Johnson uses make. So he made a window, he made another window.
Hmm.
And what the Spanish, in fact, I translated the Spanish and the proofreader suggested, she said, oh, there's a lot of make. You just change it to, and I said, no, 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 it has to be, it can't be
Hmm.
draw because it sort of gives it away, you know, in the actual text. The
Hmm.
whole fun of it is that he's making, he's not drawing.
Hmm.
That there is something magic about the fact that he's making.
Hmm.
So it was just, I just thought it was interesting to that when you're translating, you think of these things, and
Hmm.
you know that obviously they're intertwined in the book. But I thought it was interesting sort of to point out that as a translator, we thought very carefully and thought, no, we can't spoil it with draw,
Hmm.
if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, I put draw in the title because that points people to what Harold is doing. He is making a world, but
mm,
he's doing it via art. So that's why I put draw in the title. And then also, I just needed a hook for this. And how to draw the world seemed to be
sounds,
a
yeah.
doorway into the many ideas in the book. So that was part of it. And I guess I also think of draw in terms of drawing up architectural plans,
Yes.
do push us in the direction of making and not sort of merely drawing, but
Yeah, yeah.
actually
I mean,
drawing up plans.
I
So,
think the How to Draw the World, that's the title of your book is. I don't have a problem with it at all.
no, I
It was
mean,
just
it's a
that
good,
exactly at the time when I was doing it, I was going,
yeah.
oh. And obviously, yes, also draw does have those different meanings in English. And in
Mm,
Spanish, not really. So they're
mm,
sort of different options, but they don't have the same, they don't sort of belong to the same
yeah.
field of
Same
synonyms
kind of
almost. No, you can sort
category.
of
Yeah.
in English you can play about with it, but draw means more than just
Yeah,
dibujar.
I think that's part of it too. And there's something preposterous in the title, How to Draw the
Mm,
World. Like
mm,
that's possible. So
yeah.
I mean, so that's also I think why I put it there
Mm,
because it is possible for Harold. But there's a bold claim in that. You know, this book will show you how to draw the world.
hmm
So kind of a provocation, I guess, in
Yeah,
part.
and it also sounds like a sort of book of instructions to, sort of
Right, exactly, which
exactly.
it is not. So it's a bit of a wink to that
Hmm
notion too.
In your article 10 of AI, Pick Up a Crayon,
Oh, great.
oh,
Yeah.
you call Harold and the Purple Crayon a manifesto for human creativity disguised as a children's picture book.
Yep.
Um, could you unpack that more, or why
Yeah.
choose Harold as your anchor for a critique of generative AI?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think people think that throwing prompts into AI creates art, but that does not create art. Art requires human consciousness. It requires the friction of our imagination against that blank page. And that's what Harold does, right? He faces an empty canvas, he scribbles, he is an active dreamer who figures out where he is going by creating art. Drawing is a form of thinking for Harold. Drawing should be a form of thinking. AI cannot think. AI can only steal. AI can only imitate. And Harold does not steal. He, you know, discovers where he is going through creating art. And that's what art is. It's a process of discovery. You make mistakes and you have to recover from those mistakes by drawing the balloon once you've fallen off the cliff, right?
Mm,
And that's what Harold does. And so I chose the book as an argument against AI because it really does show us that the sort of frictionless creativity that AI promises is a lie.
mm,
There is no frictionless creativity. You have to face the blank page. And you'll face it with what you know. You'll face it with your human experience, or in Crockett Johnson's case, a couple of decades of working as a cartoonist, as an editor, as a writer, and you bring that human experience, in his case, in the visual arts, to bear upon what you're doing, and you make choices based on that. AI doesn't choose. AI merely creates statistically probable images and sentences. That's not choice, and that's not thinking. And so it seemed to me that a book in which drawing is a form of thinking is, in some ways, the most eloquent argument against AI and for our own humanity. Because that's what worries me about AI. If we outsource creativity, we outsource our humanity, and that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing.
And as an example of, I mean, I think it's sort of a truly remarkable picture book model.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, from that point of view, like what makes it so modelic? We've talked, I mean, we've covered several other things, but what is it that makes it so modelic as children's literature? Because I think there's so, it's a bit like the moon, like Harold can can follow, we can all follow Harold, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a real economy of style and expression in the prose as well as the art. Johnson only gives us what we need for the story. I think maybe that is part of it. And I mean, I think one reason that so many people have been drawn to it is it really is a poem to creativity, to creation, to using your imagination, which is something that I think adults forget. As children we scribble, as children we make up songs, and as adults we're supposed to be serious and not do that anymore. And I think the book is a reminder that, yeah, be creative,
Mhm.
make art. I mean, that's why Harold and the Purple Crayon was Prince's favorite book, and he adopted purple as a signature color.
Mm.
Chris van Allsburg thanks Vermeer and Harold and the Purple Crayon in his speech when he won the Caldecott for Jumanji, which was a picture book before it became a film franchise. But I think that kind of encouragement to imagine, to dream, and that you don't need much to do it
Mm.
is what makes it so powerful to other creators of picture books and just other artists in general. One of the really fun things was discovering how many people found Harold as an influence.
Mm.
That in Captain Underpants, the character Harold is named for Harold and the
Oh
Purple
yeah.
Crayon. Um, but like all over the place and things where you didn't expect, like, oh, there's Harold. I didn't expect to see him over there. So that was really quite exciting and interesting to see how this little book had these ripples far beyond what Johnson or Harold could have imagined.
We're almost finishing. At Wonder Ponder, we have also published Ellen's Lion
Yay!
and plan to publish The Lion's Own Story soon.
Yay!
How would you say Harold and the Purple Crayon talks to Ellen's Lion, or vice versa? Maybe Ellen's Lion talks to.
Yeah, they're both stories about creative children. For Ellen, the lion is the crayon. The lion is the symbol of her creative imagination. And these conversations that she has with the lion is that interaction between Harold and the crayon, or I don't know, maybe the crayon and the page. So there is an
Mhm.
analogy there that's made. I mean, I think what's different about them is that the energy of the story is not in the line of the crayon. It's not in the drawing of the lion either. It's in Johnson's prose, in which he offers a sympathetic but also slightly bemused look at Ellen and her stuffed lion, who
Mhm.
she interacts with as if he were alive and real, not unlike Calvin and Hobbes.
Exactly. Mm.
So, but they are warm and gentle and whimsical and delightful stories. They're really the children's book editor Susan Hirschman, who was at Harper when those books came in. They're really her favorites of Johnson's stories, and she was so delighted that they were able to publish them. She was one of the editors who worked with and for Ursula there, and is still around. I saw her this summer in New York, but she brought up Ellen's Lion at that time because she always had a strong affection for and connection to both of those books, Ellen's Lion and The Lion's Own Story.
Mm. Your book, How to Draw the World, is part of the series Children's Classics Critically,
It is
which you're
indeed.
also, are you also an editor of the
I'm also an
section?
editor. Yes, that is the first in the series. The next one will be on Paddington.
Mhm.
It's called "Please Look After This Bear: How Paddington Became British," uh, and so that will be out in February. And we have books forthcoming on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, on Pippi Longstocking, on Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, and many others under contract. The notion is that each book will be about a children's book or children's book series. So it's a series of small books full of big ideas about small books.
Okay. Sounds great. I'm looking forward to the rest of the titles. I think we're going to draw this to an end. Draw this to an end. Haha. Thank you so much, Phil, for this wonderful conversation and for everything you've done to help us see just how much there is inside Harold's Purple Line. Thank everyone for watching and listening. You can now find Harold y el lápiz morado and Harold y el llapis morat in bookshops across Spain. And if you'd like to go even deeper, don't miss Philip Nell's How to Draw the World, published by Oxford University Press. It really is worth it. And remember, keep your crayon handy.
Always keep your wits in your purple crayon,
Exactly.
as we would say. Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks so much for translating these both into Spanish and into Catalan. I look forward to seeing those.
I'll send them. This is still at the printers, but we should be getting them, I think, next week. We'll send them off as soon as we get them. Thank you very
Wonderful.
much, Phil, for your time.
Thank you.
It's been great. Thanks.